Don't come to Mom's retirement party. She's already made it clear she doesn't want you there. My phone slipped from my trembling fingers. I stared at the message over and over, as if rereading it could somehow erase the words, make them vanish into nothing. But the hurt lingered, sharp and raw. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 34. I work as a forensic accountant in Chicago, and I've been Mom's son, my sister's brother, for my entire life. I've lived a routine of polite silences and small nods, a kind of invisible background in my own family. Conversations felt like negotiations, smiles like armor. I'd been close to my sister, Clara, once. We used to laugh until our stomachs hurt. But somewhere along the way, distance crept in. She moved across the country. I stayed buried in spreadsheets and numbers. Calls became texts. Visits became obligations. And the last message shattered any illusion I had of family unity. I tried calling her. No answer. I texted again. Clara, why? Her reply was delayed, cold. I told you, don't come. You already know what she thinks. I knew what she meant. Or at least I thought I did. Mom's retirement party wasn't just a celebration of 35 years of teaching at the local high school. It was also a test of loyalty, a subtle ranking of who mattered in her life. And apparently, I had failed. The betrayal didn't make sense at first. Mom had always been proud of me, praised my achievements quietly while showering Clara with attention and accolades. Yet now, in the moment I wanted to celebrate her life, she had quietly excluded me. And the worst part, I wasn't even told in person. I decided to go anyway. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The moment I walked into the hall, it hit me. Clara was standing near the stage, laughing with a group of guests. Mom's face lit up when she saw her daughter, a warmth reserved exclusively for her. And then, in that split second, I realized, Mom hadn't even prepared for my arrival. There was no seat, no mention, no smile. Just a polite, almost strained nod when she caught my eye. And that's when I saw it, the envelopes. Stacked neatly on a table by Clara's side. Invitations, personalized notes, a welcome that clearly hadn't been meant for me. The humiliation stung more than I'd expected. I felt like a ghost in the room I'd grown up in. Later, after the speeches and applause, I confronted Clara in the courtroom. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and disappointment. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice even. Clara shrugged. "I did. You just didn't listen." "I did listen. I read your message. But this, excluding me? Mom wouldn't even notice if I weren't here." Her eyes were cold, detached. "Ethan, sometimes people aren't meant to be noticed." I laughed, bitterly, the sound echoing against the mirrors. "You're supposed to be my sister. My family. You're supposed to care." "You don't get it," she said sharply. "You've always been convenient. Now you're not." The words cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. Convenient. Not wanted. Not even missed. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't about Mom. It was about Clara, and perhaps it had been there all along, masked by childhood games and shared memories. I left without a word. Driving home, the streets blurred past me, light streaking across the windshield. I felt nothing and everything at once. Anger, shame, grief. It all collided, leaving me hollow, yet strangely awake. That night, I sat in my apartment, the city hum vibrating through the walls. I replayed every interaction, every missed opportunity to speak up, every moment I had allowed myself to shrink into the background. And then it hit me. I had been giving my energy to people who saw me as a shadow. People who had never truly valued me. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve yelling or confrontations. It was quiet, painful, honest. I cried, not out of sorrow but because I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of being invisible to those I trusted most. I began setting boundaries. Calls to Clara went unanswered. I didn't chase the apology I wasn't owed. I stopped trying to fit into a narrative that wasn't mine. And with that release came clarity. I didn't need validation from the people who had already shown me my place. Weeks passed. Mom reached out eventually, a hesitant email. "I hope you're doing okay. I missed you at the party." I read it, felt the familiar pang of longing, then deleted it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe never. Instead, I focused on myself. I rekindled friendships I'd neglected, poured energy into work that mattered, and even started volunteering at a local community center. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not by my family, but by the world I chose to inhabit. Months later, Clara called. Her voice was tentative, almost guilty. "Ethan, can we talk?" I paused. I could feel the old desire for connection rising, the part of me that still wanted to be her brother, to belong. But I remembered the weight of that message, the sting of being dismissed, and I realized I didn't have to forgive her for my own sake. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I owed her. It was a boundary I respected for myself. "I'm okay," I said calmly. "I'm finally okay." That's enough. The conversation ended there. No recriminations. No apologies. Just a quiet acceptance that some relationships can't be repaired, not because of malice, but because the damage is too fundamental, too revealing of who we truly are to each other. Reflecting on all of it now, I understand the lesson. Betrayal often comes not in the grand gestures, but in the subtle exclusions, the tiny dismissals, the messages never sent and the seats never saved. And surviving it requires more than anger. It requires self-respect, courage, and the willingness to let go. I still love my sister in the way one loves a person you once trusted completely. But I no longer rely on her to define my worth. I no longer need her acknowledgement to exist fully, to be proud of my life, my achievements, my choices. Life is fragile. Relationships are fragile. But dignity, that is something we carve for ourselves, quietly, fiercely, and without apology. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this: never shrink to fit someone else's idea of you. Never wait for validation from people who see you as optional. Protect your space, your time, your love. And remember, walking away isn't defeat, it's survival. Because sometimes, the hardest betrayal teaches the most essential truth, that the person who needs your respect most is you. After that night, something inside me shifted. The hollowness I'd felt walking out of Mom's retirement party didn't vanish immediately. It lingered, a dull ache reminding me that I had been overlooked, dismissed, and excluded. But instead of breaking me, it became a lens. I started noticing patterns I'd ignored for years. How Clara had subtly undermined me in family conversations, how Mom often praised her in front of friends while my own accomplishments were barely acknowledged. The betrayal wasn't a one-time event. It was a thread woven into my life, now glaringly visible. I threw myself into work, but differently this time. Where before I'd buried myself in spreadsheets to escape, now I worked with intention, purpose. Every financial anomaly I uncovered, every complex audit I completed, it wasn't just a paycheck. It was proof that I could matter. I started mentoring younger accountants, sharing lessons I'd learned the hard way, and seeing their respect gave me a kind of validation I'd never expected. It was quieter than family praise, but it felt infinitely more real. One evening, about a month after the party, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hesitant, I answered. "Ethan." The voice was soft, tentative, female. Not Clara. "Who is this?" I asked cautiously. "My name is Lily. I work with your mom at the school. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I think she regrets how things went at the party. I see it in her emails, her messages to staff. She's trying to reach out to you, but she doesn't know how." I felt the familiar tug of longing, that dangerous pull toward closure. But I also felt something else: distance. Space to think, space to reflect. "Tell her," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "that I'm fine. I'm living my life. She doesn't need to fix anything for me." There was silence on the line, then a soft, almost relieved, "I understand." And just like that, she hung up. I spent that night thinking about forgiveness. It's a word that's thrown around as if it's a cure-all, a salve that magically makes pain disappear. But the truth is more complicated. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing. It's about reclaiming your power, taking back the pieces of yourself that were scattered by someone else's indifference. Weeks turned into months. Clara tried again, texting, calling, even sending a carefully framed photo from a family outing. I didn't respond. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. I realized that sometimes people aren't capable of change. They can apologize, but that doesn't undo the damage. And I had spent too long hoping for change to rely on it anymore. Instead, I found new connections. I joined a local hiking group, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. The trails became therapy, the wind against my face, the relentless climb, and the quiet of the forest helped me breathe again. I laughed more than I had in years, not because I wanted to escape pain, but because I was learning to live within it, alongside it, rather than trying to erase it. One day, hiking alone in the early spring, I realized how much I'd grown. I looked out over a ridge, sunlight scattering across the city below, and thought about the person I'd been before the betrayal, careful, timid, always shrinking. And then I thought about who I was now, grounded, resilient, and entirely my own. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. Not for anyone else, not for social media or approval. Just writing. Confessions, memories, reflections. I filled pages with the story of my family, of Clara, of Mom, and of my own journey from invisibility to presence. Writing became my confession, my therapy, and ultimately my witness. I realized that telling my story, to myself and to others, was the act that made my experience matter. Months later, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a letter from Mom. Her handwriting was shaky, the paper slightly crumpled, like it had traveled far to reach me. "Ethan," she wrote, "I am sorry. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I only caused pain. I miss you, and I am proud of the man you've become. If you ever want to talk, I will listen. No judgment. No expectations." I read it twice. Then I set it down. I didn't feel compelled to call her. I didn't feel the old longing to be validated by her words. Instead, I felt calm, complete. I had arrived at a place where her acknowledgement was unnecessary for my sense of self-worth. Even Clara reached out again, months later. I read her messages, carefully crafted apologies, explanations, subtle pleas, but I didn't respond. I realized that some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. My dignity wasn't negotiable, and my heart wasn't a playground for her remorse. Life, of course, didn't suddenly become perfect. There were days when loneliness crept in, when I questioned my choices, when the old wound pulsed sharply. But those moments were different now. They didn't define me. They reminded me that I had survived, that I had rebuilt, and that I had chosen myself over the hollow comfort of being wanted by people who couldn't see my value. I began helping others in situations like mine, people navigating family betrayal, toxic relationships, or emotional neglect. I shared my story in workshops, in writing, even in casual conversations over coffee. And every time, I noticed something remarkable. Healing isn't just about moving on. It's about realizing that your life, your happiness, your sense of worth, is yours to claim. I also learned the subtle power of silence. There's a difference between speaking and being heard. And sometimes, the most profound conversations are the ones you never have with people who have failed to earn your trust. Choosing not to respond isn't weakness, it's wisdom. One evening, as I walked home from a late shift at the community center, I saw a family walking together, laughing, completely absorbed in each other's company. I felt a pang of longing, but not sadness. I realized that love, real love, the kind that strengthens rather than diminishes, was still possible. It might not come from my family, but it could come from friendships, chosen family, and self-love. I thought about the lessons the betrayal had taught me. I had learned that respect is earned, not granted by blood. That silence can be louder than words. That boundaries aren't walls, they are the frame for your life, defining what is acceptable and what is not. Most importantly, I learned that self-worth isn't contingent on anyone else's recognition. It's forged in the quiet moments, the hard choices, the refusals to settle for less than you deserve. Now, when I see Clara's name pop up on my phone, I don't flinch. I don't rush to answer. I evaluate. I choose. And most of the time, I choose me. There's a strange freedom in that choice. A freedom I wish I had known years ago, when the exclusion felt unbearable. But even that was part of the journey, the painful path that led me to recognize my own strength. If you're listening and you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, dismissed by people you love, know this: your value isn't tied to their acknowledgement. Their silence, their coldness, their betrayal, it reflects their limitations, not yours. You are not broken because they failed to see you. You are whole because you survived, because you chose yourself, because you refused to let their indifference define your life. I still think about Mom sometimes, about what could have been if things were different. But those thoughts no longer weigh me down. They're part of my story, yes, but they're not the definition of it. My story is about resilience, about discovering the depth of my own strength, about the quiet dignity that comes from walking away when others have failed to honor you. Life doesn't hand out justice neatly, and people rarely apologize as they should. But that's not where healing comes from. Healing comes from reclaiming your life, setting your boundaries, and choosing authenticity over approval. It comes from recognizing that you are enough, that your existence is valuable, and that no one gets to decide your worth but you. I've started a new tradition for myself. Every year on Mom's retirement anniversary, I take a day to reflect on my journey. Not to dwell, not to mourn, but to honor how far I've come. To acknowledge the strength it took to face betrayal, to walk away, and to rebuild a life that is fully, unapologetically mine. Some may call it closure. I call it freedom. Because freedom isn't about making someone else understand. It's about understanding yourself. It's about standing tall even when the people who were supposed to love you falter. It's about choosing to live fully, fiercely, and on your own terms. And if there's one truth I hope you take with you, it's this. When you claim your dignity, when you choose yourself over the hollow comfort of being wanted by people who don't see your value, you'll discover a peace that no betrayal can touch. That's the real reward. That's the lesson that betrayal, when faced with courage, ultimately teaches. That you, and only you, hold the key to your own worth. Even after months of distance, life had a way of reminding me that the past isn't entirely gone. One rainy afternoon, I received a message from Clara, brief, clipped, "Mom wants to see you. She says it's important." My first instinct was to ignore it. Old habits die hard, and I had learned to guard my peace fiercely. But curiosity nagged at me. Part of me wanted to see if the woman who had dismissed me could finally recognize the hurt she had caused. I chose a public place, a small cafe downtown, so that I could control the environment. When I arrived, Mom was already seated, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, eyes avoiding mine. She looked smaller somehow, like the years of authority and control had softened into fragility. "Ethan," she said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of years of unspoken truths. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. I kept my hands on the table, silent, steady. I've thought a lot about the party," she began. "About how I treated you. I can see now that I made a mistake. I excluded you, and that was wrong." I studied her, searching for sincerity, but also bracing myself for the familiar deflection, the excuses I'd learned to anticipate. "I know you're sorry," I said carefully. "But apologies don't undo the feeling of being invisible. I don't need you to explain why. I need you to understand that your absence, your disregard, hurt me deeply." Mom's eyes welled up. She looked older than I remembered, vulnerable in a way that made me ache. But I stayed composed. I had spent months learning to honor my own boundaries. The time for comforting her was past. "I do understand, Ethan," she whispered. "I wish I could change the past, but I can't. I just want to try now, before it's too late." "I appreciate that," I said. "But we both need to recognize something. Rebuilding trust takes time. And I don't owe you my presence just because you ask for it now." She nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of reality. It was strange, seeing her accept the consequences of her choices without defensiveness. For the first time, I felt the possibility of a neutral connection, a relationship not built on convenience or hierarchy, but on honesty. Over the next few weeks, we had small, careful interactions. Lunches, short phone calls, text messages that weren't about obligations but about real conversation. It was awkward at times, yes, but it was real. For the first time, I felt like we were navigating the relationship on equal footing, rather than me shrinking to fit into a role I never chose. Clara, meanwhile, began inserting herself more actively into my life, but I maintained distance. She wanted to discuss family events, future plans, even my personal achievements. And I listened politely, but I never let her words or actions dictate my self-worth again. Every interaction was a reminder that I could be civil without sacrificing my dignity. One night, I found myself reflecting on the power of choice. All my life, I had tried to force connection, chasing approval, seeking validation, hoping that love or respect would arrive if I pushed hard enough. But the betrayal at Mom's party had taught me something far more valuable, that true control comes from within. The only person who can determine my value is me. And once I grasped that, life became less about avoidance or longing, and more about deliberate action. I started mentoring not just at work, but in my community. Young people, often overlooked or dismissed, sought guidance. And I realized that my experience, the betrayal, the pain, the feeling of invisibility, was now a tool I could use to help others. It gave me empathy, perspective, and an unshakable patience. One of the students I mentored, a teenager named Marcus, reminded me a lot of my younger self, eager, anxious, desperate to be noticed by a family that didn't always see him. One day, after a particularly hard session, he asked me, "Do you think people like my parents will ever notice me?" I looked at him and said softly, "Maybe they won't. But that doesn't make you invisible. The people who matter, who truly see you, are the ones you choose to let into your life. And most importantly, you have to see yourself first. Once you do that, nothing can take away your value." He nodded, thoughtful. I saw the spark of understanding that I had fought so hard to cultivate in myself. And in that moment, I realized something profound. My journey wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity. It was about using my story, my pain, my resilience, to give others a path forward. Months turned into a year. I had started traveling, short trips, long walks in unfamiliar cities, immersing myself in experiences that had nothing to do with anyone else. I discovered new passions: photography, cooking, even a weekend writing workshop where I met people who had also faced betrayal and invisibility. The conversations were raw, authentic, and liberating. For the first time, I felt fully seen, not by family, but by life itself. And then one afternoon, Clara sent a final message. It was simple, almost casual: "I hope you're happy." "I really do." I read it slowly, letting the words sink in. I didn't respond, not out of anger, not out of spite. I didn't need to. Her attempt at reconciliation, while genuine in its own way, was no longer the measure of my worth. I was happy, not because she acknowledged me, but because I had created a life that was fully my own. Looking back, I understand now that betrayal is a mirror. It reflects not just the flaws of those who hurt us, but the truths about ourselves we may have ignored. I learned patience, resilience, and above all, self-respect. I learned that walking away isn't an act of defeat, it's a declaration of self-worth. And I learned that the strongest bonds we forge are often the ones we choose deliberately, rather than the ones we inherit by default. I've kept writing, now more than ever. I journal, I blog, I speak at gatherings about emotional resilience, boundaries, and the transformative power of self-respect. Each story I tell, each lesson I share, is infused with the memory of that rainy night when my sister told me not to come, when my mother's absence cut deeper than any insult ever could. It fuels my empathy, sharpens my insight, and reminds me daily that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. There are days when I still feel the ache, the shadow of betrayal. But those moments are brief. They serve as a reminder of what I've overcome, not what I've lost. I've discovered that life doesn't have to be dictated by the actions of others. My peace, my happiness, my identity, they are mine alone to protect, nurture, and celebrate. Sometimes, I think about the retirement party, the cold message, the humiliating realization that I was deemed unimportant. And I smile, quietly, because that moment, painful as it was, became the catalyst for everything that followed. It pushed me to see clearly, to act decisively, and to build a life where my value isn't contingent on anyone else's approval. Now, when I walk through life, I carry an invisible shield, not one of anger or bitterness, but one forged from clarity, dignity, and self-respect. Betrayal may have tried to define me, but I chose the narrative. I am no longer a shadow in my own story. I am the author, the witness, and the protagonist. And the truth I want everyone listening to hold close is this: betrayal, exclusion, neglect, they sting. They wound. But they can also teach. They can be the fire that purifies, the pressure that reveals strength, and the spark that ignites self-respect. No apology, no acknowledgement, No return to how things were is necessary for you to reclaim your life. You already have the power. You always have. I am Ethan Cole, and I am proof that even when the people who should love you falter, you can survive, thrive, and ultimately rise above. That's not a story of revenge. It's a story of reclamation. A story of dignity. And a story that belongs to me, and only me.